So on May 1st, 2026, Spirit Airlines accounted for over 5% of all U.S. flights.
Right, a huge chunk of the market.
Yeah. But on May 2nd, that number was zero.
Literally zero, overnight.
Just imagine you are, one of the thousands of travelers who showed up at the airport for a summer vacation that morning. You walk through the sliding glass doors, you look up at the digital departure boards, and it is just
Just a sea of flashing red canceled signs.
exactly a sea of red. You head over to the check-in counter, but the desks are completely abandoned. And then this realization slowly washes over you that the airline you booked your ticket with simply doesn't exist anymore.
It's a staggering sequence of events. And, what we are looking at today isn't just an aviation story.
Right.
It is essentially a masterclass in how fragile global supply chains and, well, really thin margin business models truly are when they are tested by sudden macroeconomic shocks.
And to figure out exactly how this happened, we're diving into a massive stack of sources today. We've got financial reports from the bankruptcy filings, international news coverage ranging from the Straits Times to the Guardian, and a lot of very heated industry analyses.
Yeah, there's a lot of finger pointing going on right now.
Oh, tons. So our mission for this deep dive is to trace this collapse from the abandoned runways all the way back to a drone strike 7,000 miles away in the Middle East. We're going to decode the bitter political battle currently raging in Washington over a multi-billion-dollar bailout and, crucially, figure out what this means for your wallet.
Because if you're wondering why your summer vacation just got way more expensive, this is exactly why. The ground can just fall out from under these companies in an absolute instant.
Yeah.
And to really grasp the massive economic forces at play here, we have to start at the end. We have to look at the immediate fallout of Spirit's final moments.
The suddenness of it is just wild to me. It's what's so hard to wrap your head around. On May 2nd, the airline didn't just, scale back. They ceased operations completely and abruptly.
Right.
Passengers were literally getting messages from the U.S. Secretary of Transportation saying, don't show up at the airport. There will be no one here to assist you.
It's unprecedented. The final flight landed in Dallas just after midnight, and that was it. The lights were out.
Just like that.
Yeah, and the human and logistical toll of that midnight shutdown is massive. Overnight, 17,000 jobs were lost.
Wow. 17,000.
Yeah, and that includes 14,000 direct employees. We are talking about 2,000 pilots and 5,000 cabin crew members who, went to sleep employed and woke up without a job.
And the flight capacity just vanished from the market just as fast.
Yeah.
Between May 1st and May 15th alone, 4,119 domestic flights were wiped off the map.
That's a staggering number of grounded planes.
It is. That is over 800,000 seats gone in a 2-week span.
We really have to put this into historical context because no U.S. carrier of this size has liquidated in 2 decades. But we also have to remember Spirit was already deeply wounded.
Right. They weren't exactly in peak health.
Exactly. They had filed for bankruptcy twice in just the last 18 months, and their projected market share had recently collapsed down to just 1.8%.
Okay, so let's unpack the mechanism behind that vulnerability.
Sure.
Because how a multi-billion-dollar company can just evaporate overnight is wild. It's like, think of it like running a local delivery business where you only make a $1 profit per trip, right?
Okay. Yeah.
You're operating on pure volume. If the price of gas goes up by $1.50 overnight, you don't just lose a little bit of money. It literally costs you money every single time you turn the ignition.
Right.
You can't outrun that math. You just have to park the trucks immediately.
That is the perfect analogy for the ultra-low-cost carrier model. Their entire business structure relies on 2 non-negotiable factors: extremely high volume and rock-bottom operational costs.
Got to keep those planes full.
Keep them full and keep them cheap to fly. They make their money by packing the metal tubes full and charging for every single extra layer of service.
Right, the infamous bare-bones fare. Carry-on bags, seat assignments, even a bottle of water.
Exactly. It's a high-wire act. When operational costs are low, the model just prints money. But when those operational costs spike, their profit margin doesn't just shrink. The entire defensive moat completely dries up.
They don't have any padding.
None. Because they sell tickets at the lowest possible baseline, they have zero financial cushion built into their pricing to absorb a sudden, massive expense.
Which brings us to the $360 million question. Spirit was already on life support, sure, but what actually delivered the fatal blow?
The catalyst.
Right. And for that, we have to look at the Strait of Hormuz. Because it's the global choke point for 20% of the world's oil, the disruption there didn't just rattle the financial markets. It completely shattered Spirit's restructuring plan.
This is where global geopolitics violently collide with everyday consumer life.
Yeah. Looking at the sources, the ongoing U.S.-Israel war on Iran, which really began escalating in late February of 2026, severely disrupted shipping through the strait. And that disruption sent global jet fuel prices just into the stratosphere.
The magnitude of the shock is incredible. So, Spirit's restructuring plan was built on the assumption that jet fuel would cost around $2.24 per gallon in 2026.
Okay.
Instead, by late April, the price had more than doubled, hitting around $4.51 per gallon.
Wow. So overnight, they're staring down a price that literally breaks their business model.
Completely breaks it.
That single miscalculation, driven by a war halfway across the globe, added an estimated $360 million in unexpected costs to an airline that had already been through bankruptcy court twice.
They simply didn't have $360 million extra dollars sitting around. And, of course, the broader economic impact extends far beyond aviation.
Right. It hit everything.
Yeah, global Brent crude briefly touched a 4-year peak of $126.41. In the U.S., retail gas averaged $4.23 a gallon in April.
Which is up about 30% year over year, right?
Exactly. And diesel hit $5.50, up over 50%. Even fertilizer shipments, like urea, moving through the Strait of Hormuz, dropped to near zero.
Now, looking at the data in these international sources, we are dealing with a highly complex, deeply contentious global conflict. And just to be clear to you listening, we are strictly following the economic chain reaction report here. We're not taking political sides.
Right, we're just looking at the facts as they're reported.
Exactly. The sources highlight intense political divisions over this war. China's UN ambassador explicitly called the U.S. attack an illegitimate war and blamed it as the root of this global economic crisis.
While on the other side, the U.S. has been actively warning shippers about the dangers of paying Iran to traverse the strait.
Right. But regardless of the politics, the economic math is impartial here. A geopolitical conflict disrupted an oil supply chain, which doubled the cost of jet fuel, which broke a major airline.
The market just reacts to the supply shock? It doesn't care about the political rhetoric?
But here's where I have to push back a little on the mechanics of this. If the Strait of Hormuz disruption caused jet fuel prices to double for everyone, why did only Spirit collapse?
That's the big question.
I mean, why aren't the big legacy carriers, your Deltas, your Uniteds, your Americans, why aren't they locking their airport doors at midnight too?
And that goes right back to the shock absorbers that legacy carriers have built into their businesses. First, they have sheer scale and global networks.
Right.
Second, they have premium seating, business and first-class tickets that generate huge insulating profit margins. But third, and this is the massive difference, they have incredibly lucrative loyalty programs and co-branded credit card partnerships.
Oh, right. Because a legacy carrier isn't just selling you a seat from point A to point B.
No, not at all.
They're essentially operating as highly profitable banks that just happen to fly planes.
Precisely. Airlines like Delta and United sell billions of dollars worth of frequent flyer miles directly to banks like Chase or American Express.
Wow.
The banks give those miles to you as credit card rewards, but the airline gets an ocean of cash up front, independent of the actual flying. This provides a multi-billion-dollar cash cushion. Furthermore, these major airlines often hedge their fuel costs, buying financial derivatives that act as insurance against price spikes.
So if you are United, you can take a temporary loss on the doubled cost of jet fuel because you are making up the margin on the $500 annual fee people are paying for your premium credit card.
Exactly.
But Spirit's only product was the flight itself. When the fuel bill doubled, it was mathematically impossible for them to continue.
They had absolutely no margin for error left.
So with the $360 million sudden deficit, the math stopped working. Spirit couldn't sell enough $4 water bottles to bridge that gap.
Not even close.
Their only remaining option wasn't in the free market. It was in Washington.
Right. Because when a major employer and service provider faces imminent collapse, the crisis instantly shifts from a corporate boardroom to Capitol Hill.
And according to the reports, the Trump administration actually proposed a $500 million bailout specifically to save Spirit. But there was a massive catch.
There usually is.
Yeah, the government wanted 90% of the company's equity in exchange for that lifeline.
Mm.
Ultimately, this failed because Spirit's creditors, major financial firms like Citadel, Ares Management, and Cyrus Capital, looked at the deal and completely rejected the terms.
Which might sound counterintuitive. Why would creditors reject $500 million that could save the company?
Right. It sounds crazy.
It comes down to the brutal mechanics of bankruptcy. These creditors ran the math and realized that handing over 90% of the company to the government left them with less value than simply letting the airline die.
Because a dead airline's assets are actually worth more to them than a federally owned living one.
Exactly. When you liquidate an airline, you can sell the planes, the engines, the spare parts, and the incredibly valuable airport landing slots to other airlines.
So it's just a job shop at that point.
Pretty much. To firms like Citadel, chopping Spirit up and selling it for scrap generated a higher financial return than holding on to a 10% equity stake in a heavily indebted, bleeding airline trying to survive a global fuel crisis. Liquidating was just better math.
Wow. But Spirit wasn't the only budget airline bleeding out from this fuel spike. Simultaneously, a newly formed lobbying group popped up called the Association of Value Airlines, or the AVA.
Right.
This group represents the remaining budget carriers. Airlines like Frontier, Avelo, Allegiant, and Sun Country. They watched Spirit go under, and they went to the government asking for a $2.5 billion liquidity pool to help them specifically with fuel aid.
And they offered the government stock warrants in return.
Yeah, and they're also begging Congress to suspend the 7.5% federal excise tax on airline tickets just to give them some breathing room.
And this is where the partisan blame game kicks into high gear, with every side pointing at a different root cause for the crisis.
It really does. And again, just looking at what our sources report these politicians are saying, Republicans, like Representative Thomas Massie, are pointing the finger squarely at the Biden administration's Department of Justice.
Right.
Massie argues that because the DOJ blocked a $3.8 billion merger between JetBlue and Spirit back in 2024, citing antitrust concerns, that a merger would raise consumer prices, they actually doomed Spirit to this fate.
The irony being that by trying to preserve a low-cost competitor, the DOJ may have left Spirit too weak to survive an independent shock, ultimately removing those cheap seats from the market anyway.
Right. Meanwhile, you have Democrats, like Senator Elizabeth Warren, arguing the exact opposite.
Right.
She stated that the spike in fuel prices caused by Trump's war with Iran was the nail in the coffin for a company that had already gone bankrupt twice.
Yeah, she accused Republicans of trying to shift the blame for the higher costs their own foreign policy created.
And then, right in the middle of this partisan crossfire, you have the current U.S. Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy. He bypasses the DOJ and the war entirely, and basically blames the budget airline business model itself.
Which is a pretty bold stance.
Yeah, he's publicly stated he doesn't think a broader $2.5 billion bailout for the AVA carriers is necessary, suggesting they should find money in the private markets rather than relying on the government as a lender of last resort.
What's really telling here is the reaction from the major legacy carriers. They are actively opposing any bailout for the budget airlines.
Oh, they don't want to save them at all?
No. Scott Kirby, the CEO of United Airlines, went on the record calling the budget model dead, and went so far as to say its entire aim was to screw the customer.
Ouch.
It's a ruthless industry. But it raises a deeply important economic question about intervention.
Well, before we get to that, there's an incredible historical irony buried in these sources that I have to bring up. We're talking about Donald Trump sitting in the Oval Office debating whether to bail out an airline dying from a Middle East fuel spike.
Right.
But 34 years ago, in 1989, Donald Trump actually bought the Eastern Shuttle and renamed it the Trump Shuttle. He put gold-plated fixtures in the bathrooms, maple veneer, expensive leather seats. But by 1992, the airline went bankrupt. And do you know why?
Let me guess. Because of a geopolitical shock in the Middle East?
Yes. Jet fuel prices doubled following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. The planes he was using, Boeing 727s, were absolute gas guzzlers, and a recession hit business travel hard.
History repeating itself.
Exactly. The fuel spike destroyed his margins, and he ultimately had to hand the airline over to creditors. It's this wild historical rhyme. 34 years later, he's dealing with the exact same economic dynamic, just from the other side of the desk.
It perfectly illustrates the eternal vulnerability of the aviation industry. It doesn't matter if you have gold-plated sinks or if you charge people for a cup of water.
Right.
If you are flying metal tubes through the sky, you are entirely at the mercy of global oil markets. Which brings us back to why Washington is so hesitant to just hand over $2.5 billion to save these other value airlines. It comes down to a concept called moral hazard.
Okay, explain how that works here.
So there is a deep hesitation to intervene with taxpayer money because bailing out airlines removes market discipline. If an airline knowingly chooses to operate a business model with razor-thin margins, knowing full well that any fuel spike could destroy them.
Right, they knew the risks.
Exactly. Saving them with public funds basically tells them they don't have to manage their own risk. It punishes the legacy carriers who did manage their risk, who built out premium cabins, loyalty programs, and fuel hedges, and it rewards the budget carriers who didn't.
So Washington can debate moral hazard and antitrust theory all day. But if you're listening to this right now and wondering why your summer vacation is suddenly in jeopardy, what does this actually mean for you? Let's say you're holding a ticket for a Spirit flight that no longer exists. What do?
The immediate advice for stranded Spirit passengers is critical. Do not cancel your bookings yourself through the Spirit app or website.
Wait, if the flight doesn't exist, why shouldn't you cancel it?
Because if you initiate the cancellation, your request enters the massive pile of unsecured debts in bankruptcy court, and you'll be treated like any other vendor Spirit owes money to.
Oh, wow. You'll never see that money.
Exactly. Instead, you need to call your credit card company and initiate a chargeback, specifically citing non-delivery of service.
Okay.
Because the airline fundamentally failed to provide the service you paid for, federal credit card dispute laws protect you. The credit card company pulls the funds back from the merchant bank, and you get your money back.
Okay, that is a huge practical tip. Always use the chargeback for non-delivery of service. Now, what about the people who had millions of free Spirit loyalty points saved up?
Unfortunately, those are practically vaporized.
Vaporized.
Really? Yeah. Loyalty points are not protected by federal law the same way cash on a credit card is. Because Spirit didn't have a massive banking partnership to guarantee those miles, the points are just unsecured obligations. They are now stuck in bankruptcy court, and passengers will be lucky to see pennies on the dollar years from now.
Ouch. That hurts. Now, I know rival airlines are stepping in to help a little bit in the short term. The sources mention United, Delta, American, JetBlue, and Frontier are offering rescue fares and fare caps.
Right.
Frontier is even offering 50% off base fares for stranded passengers. But analysts are noting that those are very short-term bandages. Historically, when Spirit previously exited just a single route, average round-trip fares on that route jumped by 23%, which is about $60.
And that brings us to the long-term outlook, which is, frankly, grim for anyone looking for cheap travel.
See, you might be thinking, I hate Spirit. I hated their baggage fees. I hated the cramped seats. I never flew them anyway. Why should I care that they went under?
Right. A lot of people feel that way.
Does their death actually mean your ticket on a legacy carrier like United or Delta is about to get way more expensive?
Yes, absolutely. This is what economists call the Spirit effect. Spirit Airlines acted as a massive pricing anchor for the entire U.S. aviation market.
Okay.
Their ultra-low fares forced the larger airlines to compete. It is the only reason Delta, United, and American introduced basic economy tickets in the first place.
Because if United tried to charge $400 for a flight, but Spirit was offering it for $49, United had to find a way to offer a cheaper stripped-down option just to not lose that customer entirely.
Precisely. Spirit dragged the entire industry's prices downward. Without them there pulling the prices down, the pricing floor of the U.S. aviation market has just been completely removed. And timing couldn't be worse, as this is happening right as we head into the peak summer travel season. The other budget carriers, like Frontier and Avelo, are much smaller. They are going to take months, if not years, to absorb Spirit's abandoned routes and restore any meaningful competition.
So to pull all of these threads together, what we've seen is a domino effect of massive global proportions. A military conflict in the Strait of Hormuz choked off the global oil supply, which spiked jet fuel prices.
Yep.
That sudden cost increase obliterated the thin margins of a major American budget airline, triggering a midnight liquidation that stranded thousands of passengers and wiped out 17,000 jobs.
It's just devastating.
It sparked a bitter partisan war in Washington over a multi-billion-dollar bailout. And for the everyday consumer, it effectively ended the era of the ultra-cheap $49 flight.
It is a profound shift in how we travel, and it leaves us with an incredibly important question to dwell on. As the remaining budget airlines right now are begging Washington for $2.5 billion in taxpayer money just to survive this fuel spike, we have to look critically at the model itself.
Right.
If an entire industry relies on rock-bottom prices that can only exist in a perfectly peaceful, low-inflation world with consistently cheap oil, is that business model actually viable? Or was the golden age of cheap travel just an illusion? A temporary luxury, secretly subsidized by an era of global stability that has now completely come to an end.
Wow, that really makes you reconsider the actual cost of a plane ticket, beyond just the dollars and cents. It makes that image of the abandoned check-in counters with the red flashing screens feel a lot less like a standard corporate bankruptcy and a lot more like the definitive end of an era.
A stark reminder of just how interconnected the global economy truly is.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope unpacking these mechanics helped clear the muddy waters of what just happened to the airline industry and be prepared for booking your next flight. We'll see you next time.